All right. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on such a cold night. I think the advantage of having all of these events recorded and shared online is that the audience can expand many times beyond what's sitting here in front of us, but also means those who actually show up deserve a lot of credit for braving the cold and being here. So thank you for showing up. I want to thank Devar for sponsoring this Shabbaton this weekend, for bringing Rabbi Bigman here to Lakeview, and for bringing so many amazing, exciting, dynamic public intellectuals and thought leaders and other types of leaders here to the greater Chicago community. It's really exciting that so many people have come and passed through your sponsorship, and thanks as well to Yeshivat Malay Gava for lending us your Rosh Yeshiva for the weekend. I also appreciate that. So the topic tonight, approaches to Halakhic process, Halakhic creativity, sort of lends itself to a number of questions that I want to ask you, some topics to explore. But maybe first, if you could start by sharing a little bit about your background as a Halachic thinker. Who are your mentors? How did you learn to be a posek and be a Halachic scholar? So please.
It's always difficult to deal with questions that you don't prepare for.
Okay.
So I don't think I've ever been asked that question. So I will say something. So first I have to say that my first impression of Psika is through Rav Aaron Soloveitchik here at the Kibbutz Yeshiva. And his approach to halacha was very much a purist kind of approach. Mara, Rishonim, primary sources, the Talmud and the classic commentators, and very straightforward. And I would say wasn't trying to be in a creative mode. But on the other hand, what was lenient on many topics because of the straightforward approach. And I think that was a strong influence on me over the years, where Rav Aaron would not be so concerned about what later authorities were saying. He would just go to the Grand Rishonim and Shulchan Aruch. That was it. And so he, as a matter of fact, I was recently asked about something that I asked him when I was in high school. He was very, very, very much for B'nai Akiva, among other things. It encouraged me personally to be active with B'nai Akiva in certain ways. So I once asked him if it was a problem that it says in the Torah in Shulchan Aruch, Tzarich Adam litrachek me'anashim mo'od mo'od. A person should stay away from women, excuse me. Very much. And if he thought there was a problem, it was halachically forbidden to be active in B'nai Akiva. And he said, there is no Isur. Which at the time I understood in the following way. That this is an amazing thing. I studied Tur in 10th grade at Skokie. I had a chavruta in Tur. We learned Tur by Joseph, the simanim of using a non-Jew on Shabbat. I mean, al nochri, several simanim. That's what we did. And we actually, this is another interesting story, just on the sideline. There was a very nice black American who worked in the yeshiva. His name was Jones. Everybody loved Jones. So we discovered that Jones, the way they used him on Shabbat was inappropriate. So we went to Rav Aaron, we're 10th grade. We go to Rav Aaron and we say, Rav Aaron, the yeshiva is hired Jones in a way that's inappropriate for Shabbat. So he said, why do you say this? Because it says in the Beit Yosef, I don't remember the details anymore. I don't remember exactly what the problem was. So he said, Rav Aaron said, you're right, I'll change it. So that's the way it was back then. It's amazing when you think about it now. And I think about it now. Here are these 10th graders, they go to the Rosh Yeshiva, who's the Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva all the yeshiva. He was taught the 9th shiur. We were in shiur gimel. And we go up to him and we say, this is wrong. So that's the way he was. So the thing is, I realized at that time that he was saying something very significant, because I had studied Torah a little bit, that Torah doesn't always mean something in the Halakhic sense. The Torah has portions of Agadata and Musar and other things that were also incorporated in Shulchan Aruch. That was the only way I could understand it. Do you understand? In other words, he didn't say anything beyond those few words. There is no Isur. There's no formal, any kind of formal prohibition in having a mixed youth group. So that's one of the things that was in my early education, is there a formal injunction? Is it formally Asur al pi halacha? Or it's just something? And I think that was a great influence on me, and it took me a while to get out of that mindset. But I still fall back to it sometimes because of, I fall back to it more as a posek and less academically. In other words, when I study poskim, I see subtext, I see other things, I'm not a purist at all. I don't agree with Rav Aaron's brother, the idea of a pure halacha, which is almost, I don't know if it's neo-Kantian or neo-Platonic. I think it's more neo-Platonic. It's like these halacha, these universal kind of truths that are heavenly truths, relationships, like Rav Solveig says, both in Isha Halacha and in his eulogy for his uncle, Madadech Midod. I don't buy into that at all. However, when I handle a halachic issue, I first handle it as a purist. I study the Gemara, I study the Talmudic sources, I study the Rishonim. I try to think how would you play it if you were just playing it straight, okay? And then, very often, I see that I'm a tremendously lenient relative to others. That's an amazing thing. I would be willing to be creative to create a leniency if it was necessary. But that's not usually my mode. Usually my mode is just Talmud, Rishonim, Shulchan Aruch, and I end up being more lenient than many authorities of the 20th century. I don't know how to explain it, but I don't think it's illegitimate to be creative in either creating something lenient or something stringent if you think it's needed. I don't think it's inappropriate to be creative halacha to change things in the direction you think is appropriate. I can't say it's not legitimate.
So what's
I don't really function that way.
What's the other piece? What's the once the black line, the pure halacha from Gemara Rishonim Shulchan Aruch is determined, what's that other piece that helps you determine which direction to nudge or where to apply your creativity?
Okay, so let me talk about the rest of my education in a certain sense. So that's very good because actually that other part is something I got from discussing issues with poskim. So my discussions with poskim, they start with a little bit of my personal history. I came to Ma'ale Gilboa after I had studied in Skokie, which was a yeshiva, which was a high school and beyond high school combined. Then I went to Keren B'Yavneh, and then I came back to Detroit. So my next mentor for halacha was Rav Bakst, even though I didn't study halacha yet. But I used to ask Rav Bakst in Detroit, who was a graduate of Meir, I would ask him halachic questions. And not only did I ask him halachic questions, he was also a straight shooter in terms of halacha. However, he also used to always tell us that there's no such thing as a chumrah or a kula. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as a leniency or being more stringent, because everything has a price. So that's like, even though I didn't study halacha with him, I studied Gemara with him, but it was something that he said all the time. He said, don't think of it as either being lenient or being stringent, there's always a price. And the price was not necessarily a halachic price. It could be a societal price, it could be some kind of, I'll give you an example. Example of a discussion I had with him. So I was active in B'nai Akiva in Detroit. I more or less was B'nai Akiva in Detroit for a while. So here I am studying at the Black Hat Yeshiva. And Rabaks about twice a year would talk against those who are active in B'nai Akiva. Those are, it's only me, right? Those are active in B'nai Akiva. But there are 30 guys at Beit Midrash, okay? So then I once had a discussion with him. So he said, it's mixed. And I think it's inappropriate. And I would say, but nobody else is doing anything for Eretz Yisrael in this community. And he said, I think helping Medinat Yisrael is important. I didn't say Medinat Yisrael, I think he said Eretz Yisrael is important. So as long as you're there, it's okay. So that is an expression. In other words, when I said, not to have this mixed youth group means that there will be nobody in the Detroit community who pushes the issue of Eretz Yisrael. So he said, you have a point. So you see, that's not a Halakhic point. So I realized that he was talking about prices. Many times I understood he was talking about the kula, which has a chumrah attached on, or vice versa, didn't necessarily mean that it was another halachic issue. It could be a different issue. So that was the next step. And then I eventually came to Malagibwa, and I was not the rabbi. I just worked on the fields. But I used to bring the questions to people. So that's where I was the shaliach. So I used to take this. First, I used to take the questions down to Henkin. The Henkens lived in Beit Shan. You have to know, the Henkens lived in Beit Shan, and Chana did really important work in Beit Shan with the community, and Rav Goren created a position for Rav Yehuda Herzl.
Oh, so she was the one who brought them to Beit Shan.
Really, and Rav Goren created a position which was called Rabbi Zori, because he recognized how important she was for the Beit Shan.
I see.
So that's the way it's told. I don't know really what it was. Anyway, so I used to go down to them so that he would discuss the Halakhic issue with me. So I saw a little bit of his approach. And eventually the poskim would tell me, well, we can discuss this with you, but we don't really get the situation on your kibbutz because we don't live there. So we think you should make the decision. This is before I studied for smicha. I was just a bachur yeshiva. We had to be malagibah. So that's when I started to understand the relationship between halacha and the particular situation at hand. So, and then I eventually went to study for smicha, and I studied with Hasidic poskim and all kinds of poskim. And my big mentor in halacha was Akiva Akarmi, was an Ilui from Chevron, Ponovich, and Momja, who ended up being a Rav Kilati in Kiryat Shmuel. So I did my sficha with him, and then I discussed things with him on the phone. And so that's like the background, but so if you put all the pieces together, so I would say there's three parts. One is straightforward, very straightforward. The second part is everything has a price. And the third part is understanding the community at hand, which from Mashash, Yosef Mashash, says, who was my first teacher, my first mentor of halacha? Reality. The reality of the situation at hand, that's my first mentor for halacha, and I think that's very important. So those are the three.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
So one of the things that's very notable about you that your students have come to appreciate is your unique derech halimud. Your method of teaching Talmud, teaching Torah is different than what's common in other yeshivot. You have somewhat of an academic style, if I can characterize it that way, of maybe not, okay, of studying Talmud that you developed, that you're known for. I'm wondering, if maybe just say briefly how, if I'm accurately or not describing it, and how you discovered that method of Talmud study and Torah study, and is there a connection between your derech halimud and your derech hapsak? Is your halachic process informed by your unique way of studying Talmud?
So the second question was asked on a bus.
Oh, okay.
On the way from Yerushalayim to Ein Surim.
Well, that's the buses.
When I was in uniform, I came back from Miluim. My student was in uniform. His name is Yeshiv Frenkel. His wife is Rachel Azaria, who is now a member of Knesset.
Yeah.
Okay, so just so you know the context. Okay. So he said, Rabbi Bigman, don't you think your derech halimud should change the way? I said, I don't know, I haven't thought about it yet. More or less, that's the way it was. Oh, I haven't thought about that at all yet. It was a real surprise to me that question came out of the blue. It hadn't been connected at all. So I will relate to it later on, but first I'll talk about how I came about it. So it's very interesting. So first of all, it has to do, I never thought that I was straying from my mentors. Complete different Rav Shagar was kind of close in these issues, but Rav Shagar thought it was a complete change, a completely different way of looking at things. So I would go through the same sequence now in a different way. So first I studied in Skokie. In Skokie they used to say, Rashi is a commentator. Rashi is a Rishon. She studied Gemara without Rashi. Then I came to Rav Baksa. So Rav Baksa is even more adamant about it. He would say, Rashi didn't have Rashi. My students called that all the time. Rashi didn't have Rashi. You have to learn the Gemara on its own. And then I went to, after I got married, I studied Yerushalayim. I studied with Rav Guzman. Rav Guzman opened my mind to Yerushalmi, Tosefta, everything, all the rest of the Talmudic material. But I also heard a few lectures by Professor Shlomo Zalman Havlin, who is also from Hebron, Shivat Hebron, by the way. So in one lecture, he showed us a Gemara where the Gemara's question changes the meaning of a Meimras, a Morag statement. Okay, I sort of jotted it down in my mind. It took me a long time to recognize his part in all of this because I really thought I was continuing my mentors, and then, like a few years ago, I said, wait a minute, I think really Professor Havlin put this in my head. Okay, so then I came back to Ma'alei Gilboa. I'd finished my 2 years in Yerushalayim before the rabbinate, and I gave, once a week, I gave a shiur, be'iyun, how do we explain iyun?
In-depth shiur.
In-depth shiur to 5 chaverim and 1 chavera who participated in the shiur. There were 6 people in the shiur, 5 or 6 people. The shiur, and most of my efforts during the week, besides working in the orchard, was to prepare the shiur. We were learning Moed Katan, and then, as they say in Hebrew, Nafali Simon. Right, how do you say that in English?
That's the pin, I don't know, so what is it? It clicked.
So here's my thought. I actually articulated the thought. Not only did Rashi not have Rashi, the Gemara didn't have the Gemara either. Okay? So then I started deconstructing the Gemara to its basic components. So it was very primitive at first. So I did this liberator. Then I started to say, wait a minute, the main roads. And then very quickly I started to dissect the whole Gemara. And it wasn't done in the academic world. That's why I don't like when people say it's academic, because only much later they start doing academic world. They do it differently than I do, even though there's some it's getting closer. The worlds are getting closer. But that time, so what I started noticing was that there's movement. There's movement. Things happen. There's a creative process, which gave me a great appreciation of the Gemara. It didn't faze me at all. And this has to do with my previous background, because I was brought up on the ethos of Chidushei Torah. But we would wait around for Reb Chaim to give us a Chidushim or some Rishon, maybe before Reb Chaim. We didn't. It was an amazing thing to me. The Amorim have something to say. The Stamai have something to say about that. Everything became alive. The Gemara is saying things. It's not just telling you something that has to be related to later on. They're actually saying things that are important and changing approaches. So something which is a static kind of a picture became a motion picture. So that's what I used to call at the beginning brisk dynamic. Very strange terminology. Okay. The reason I thought that was because I was still a brisker in the way I conceptualized every part, every frame was conceptualized. That's where I was different from the academic person. One of the Mishnah saying was conceptualized, and then you saw movement, right? So it became a movie, right? They would take the last frame.
I see.
They took the last frame. They would take the last frame. The last frame would take the Rambam and conceptualize the Rambam. But I took a bunch of frames and conceptualized all of them. So it was just this huge
dynamic brisk.
Dynamic brisk. However, 2 things happened. First of all, I had learned with Rav Guzman, so I wasn't so much of a brisker anymore. So I wasn't only concerned with just describing. I was also thinking, well, why? Why are they saying this? And then you saw movement. So you said, wow. So you could say, for example, once a woman in Kiddushin was actually bought. But in the end, after a couple of sugiyot, you see the movement, and she's no longer bought. Not really.
Right.
You see the movement in the sugiyat. So not only the achronim will say all that, you see the movement. You see them. I'm learning Kedusha now. So you see the movement, and you see it happening one time, and another time, and another time, in all different forms. And these pictures complete themselves. So unbelievable. Unbelievable. What happened to me was everything became alive. In other words, you were waiting around. When you were learning, you were waiting around for the chidush to come. But then, just comparing the Mishnah to Sefta was already a story. And the way the Gemara, the first Amoraim relate to it is a story. And everything just came alive, like just something that was like switching from black and white to color, like just amazing. What happened to me personally was amazing. And then, just about the academic world, so I met my friend, Professor Aaron Shemesh, who was then the Rosh Yeshiva at Eitz. He had a problem with Sugiyah. So I said, Aaron, your problem is just because you think the first line of the Gemara is the first line, but it's the last. The first line was written after the whole Sugiyah was written, and that's why you can't read the Sugiyah, because okay, so he said to me, it's an amazing thing. I'm a little embarrassed by it, but it's also very, I'm embarrassed by it, I'm also proud of it. He said, you are more, I have to say this in Hebrew, this is the way he said it. Professor Alivni. You are more
extreme than Halivni.
Yeah, so I said, it's amazing. I said, who's Alivni? I had no idea. So now, of course I know Professor Alivni. But then I didn't know at all. And I also wasn't so much aware of Kitvei Yad. It took me a long while. Well, so I would look at Kitvei Yad at first only when there was a serious problem in the Tfus. There were other things that came up as time went on. So it became close to the academic, but what maintained, which is different in the academic world, is what is the Gemara saying? And very often, and here I differ with Professor Livy and many academics, who hinge it on, I say they hinge it on a vav. Vav tarte mashma, how do you say that in English? Vav, is one letter, but it's also a hook. So very often I think that it's not, there might be, I don't know which comes first. Because they're saying something. You're going to tell me that they're saying this and it repeats itself just because of a vav that disappeared from the Kaviyad? I think it's very significant, but they hinge things very often and take it, not always. And also the academic world is coming closer. So like we're converging now. We were diverging, but we're converging. So for you,
the story is about ideas progressing through the history of
the history of ideas and the history of halakha. And
connect this now to Psak Halakha.
Okay, so that's so we have a couple of problems here. So the first thing is, can this be utilized for halakha? It's a big question. So I once wrote a tshuva about a non-religious person pouring wine. I was asked the question by a modern Orthodox Canadian businessman who comes to Israel and has business meetings with Chilonim, and they pour him the wine. So I wrote a tshuva, and in the tshuva, I wrote that it's an argument. I started with the fact that it's an argument between the Rashba and the Rashi. And that argument is based on two different sugiyot. And one sugiyah has a stama, you'll have to help me explain this. The stama, there's a later portion of the Gemara where he flips the position about Mechalel Shabbat. The basic take of the Gemara is that a Mechalel Shabbat is not to be considered a non-Jew in this issue. And then the Gemara flips it in the Stama. But there's another Gemara that doesn't have that part. And Rashi sticks with that Gemara, including his psakim that his students mention. Okay? So everybody noticed that Rashi was a little different, but he wasn't in the mainstream of halakha. So I said, first of all, Rashi thinks differently, okay? And then I went into the usual kind of things that people say about Chilunim today and everything else. But first of all, it's Machloek Rishonim, which got lost. That's the purest part, right?
Right.
Okay, but then, Beit Hillel, do you know about Rabbanei Beit Hillel, this organization of
I do. I know, but Beit Hillel, Israeli rabbinic organization, rabbis, modern Orthodox scholars, men and women, writing Halakhic positions, sharing it in public. Right.
So I made a mistake. I sent them, they were talking about this thing, and I sent them an edition of the Tshuva. But I had made a note for myself on that edition. The note was, what would you do if Rashi hadn't picked it up? Okay, I wrote this stuff to myself.
Because you know Rashi's correct from your Derech HaLimud. Your Talmudic scholarship tells you that Rashi's correct.
Rashi's no, I don't know which is correct, but there was a way of saying that the Mechalel Shabbat was not considered a non-Jew from the time of the Amoraim, and in the Sugiyah, and the Stama changed it. So it's Machloket, a multi-generational argument. That's what happens in my Shitat Limud. You see the multi-generational argument, the one strata and the other strata. They argue with each other, right? Or I should quote my usual quote, as the Miyuchas Rash Mishan says, Amoraim lo cholkim al Tanaim behedya.
Amoraim don't explicitly disagree with the Tanaim, the earlier.
So implicitly he's saying, implicitly you say that, implicitly they do.
Correct, right.
So they don't, okay, so that's another quote that I use a lot. So he says, okay, but the multi-generation, I can't use something which was put aside, right? So that's the question. So I asked myself the question, what would you do if nobody took up that strand?
Gotcha.
Okay, so now that question is open. The reason that question is open is because almost always somebody does. So that I haven't hit the pinnacle, that particular, what would you say? Challenge. When I really need something,
someone says it.
It usually has been said later on. But in major challenges, we could possibly use earlier ideas, and we might not use it for reasons of convention. I'll give you an example, okay? Hafkat Kiddushin. You have to help me.
Nullifying marriages, broken marriages.
Okay, so that was an idea that was pushed aside, but but again, there is a strand that picked it up, and the strand is in North Africa, in Egypt, and America. We need that idea in America, but it would be very hard to sell here because, excuse me, but the American Orthodox community knows nothing about North Africa, about Egypt, about Iraq, about Halakhic. They know nothing, and it's very hard to bring that source material in. And so there's a serious problem, but it doesn't have to do with methodology because somebody did pick up that strand, and maybe we could use that strand. So once again, it's very rare that you actually have that, right? So that's where, I don't know. So I don't know what will happen. Like I wrote myself then, what would happen if you really had a dire case that you really needed because of the prices, box prices, to be machmir, to be stringent would have a tremendous price for this couple or for somebody. And then you have an idea that appears in the Mishnah or in the earlier strata of the Gemara, and nobody picked it up. What are you going to do now? I've never been in that place. I haven't been in that place yet. Usually because somebody picks it up. So I haven't been in a situation of using Rishonim that were excluded from Shulchan Aruch, but that is very standard. Right. It has been done a lot. So I've done it in situations where others have not done it yet, but it's standard procedure. It's not.
Sure. So if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'm curious about the dynamic of creating a yeshiva on a kibbutz. And when you think of kibbutz and you think of socialism and agriculture, farming, it's a little bit of a different ethos than the standard ethos of a yeshiva, which is more cerebral, a little more hierarchical in some ways. So I guess tell me a little bit about what it is to live in a socialist paradise. Tell us a little bit about the decision to build a yeshiva dafka on a kibbutz.
Okay. It was a long process. First of all, I don't think the kibbutz, when it was socialist, I don't think it was paradise. Okay. So that might be interesting for people, but maybe we'll talk about it a little later on. We'll talk about the yeshiva first, and because how I came to kibbutz is also, I never was really a kibbutz, not really. Okay. I know I'm being watched now. I hope
the Chaverim will understand.
Yes. Okay. And there's certain things I identify, but we can talk about that later. But the Yeshivat HaKibbutzati, the Kibbutzati movement tried to start a yeshiva for its members many times. And Kibbutz was a joint venture, and it was originally Yeshiva Kibbutz Yeshiva. But because I also learned with Chaim Yaakov Goldberg, so I have a lot of respect for him, but it didn't work. He had a great affinity for the Haredi world. As he said to Aaron Shemesh and myself, he said, for me, I'll say it the way he did, Bishuli ha'emet seponovich. Okay, so that doesn't exactly work. So the next attempt, there was a later attempt to establish a yeshiva for members. And that was Yeshiva Kibbutz Yeshiva, which was a traveling circus. It was at different kibbutzim at different times. It was set up by Yedidia Cohen, Zichron Levracha, and Shimon Ekshir, Shiva de l'Chaim Arukim. And then there was a crisis, a very strange crisis. Guys from Kibbutz Yeshiva were going to Hesed Yeshivot. And also Kibbutz Yeshiva thought that it needed more Torah. It's a coalition of different forces. They didn't like the guys going to Yeshivot Hesder because they had a principle of equal service in the army.
Yeshiva Hesder, the men do 2 years yeshiva study and then a year and a half, 3 years in yeshiva, and only
a year and 4 months.
A year and 4 months in the army. So it's a long term of service, but a shorter term in the
So we don't want our children to go to Yeshivot Hesder. So we need our own yeshiva. But of course, you can't make your own yeshiva with only guys, like 10 people, young people from Kibbutz Yeshiva. So they made a program of full army service, the first in Israel, which was at Ein Suri, together with the members. There were still 15 members who came to learn for a year. They'd take a year off when the kibbutz was really kibbutz, and there was no clear connection between working and livelihood. The kibbutz would send people. They actually had to send somebody once a year to learn for Torah Avodah. So it was a very interesting combination of these older people and younger people, and a very wide selection of classes that were given because the older people needed that mostly. But it turned out that young people really appreciated having Tanakh and Machshava and Halakha and all those things, and then I was asked to become Rosh Yeshiva there when Harav, now Professor Aaron Shemesh, went on to work with Bnei Akiva in England, Shlichut. And then there was a thought that there was enough demand to have a yeshiva in the north, in which I returned home. I returned home to Mada Gilboa, where I was a member, and Shmuel Reiner and Rav Gilad founded the yeshiva, and then a couple of years later, the yeshiva in Ein Suri folded. That's what happened. Mada Gilboa was popular, and they folded. I don't think it's related to us exactly. There are kinds of problems there. That's the story. So that's what the kibbutz was founded by a Kibbutz Yeshiva movement. And there is a bit of tension, but there are a lot of ideals of Kibbutz Yeshiva that we maintain.
Such as? Such as
equal service in the army. The old ideas of Kibbutz Yeshiva, which have to do with egalitarian ideas, ideas of human dignity. Remember the socialism of Bnei Akiva, Kibbutz Yeshiva, where I had the socialist ideas. We don't have socialists, but the ideas of something universal morality, right? A sense of obligation to the Zionist venture, with some criticism of the Zionist venture as well. These are all things that were always in Kibbutz Yeshiva. So we are an extension of Kibbutz Yeshiva in that sense. I don't think we're an extension of Kibbutz Yeshiva in another way because the nature of, how do I say this properly? The yeshiva is always, by its nature, going to be in, like you said, it's something very cerebral, and it's an intellectual venture, and it's also young people who are very vibrant and confused about their lives and other things, and the world of Balabatim is a different world. So there's some tension there, but not an awful lot.
Town down tension.
And we have a lot of people. The kibbutz was rejuvenated through graduates of the yeshiva who stayed on.
I see.
So there's a connection there also.
I want to open to questions from the audience for a while, but maybe I can return to some of my own. But if people have questions for Bigman or something, we can direction to take the conversation. This would be a great chance for that. Anyone? Yeah.
So I feel like there's a tension being between having the opportunity on the kibbutz to sort of be able to foster a creative environment and an environment that's a little bit different than what the other yeshivot are doing, but at the same time, that means that you're removed from all of those yeshivot in a way, and so you can't maybe have the influence that you'd like to have on those yeshivot and on sort of the mainstream thought in Israel and in modern Orthodoxy in general. So how do you balance that tension, and how do you make sure that the thought of Malay Gilboa is really spreading out?
I don't have a good answer to that question, but I will say that the situation has changed tremendously over the last 20 years. Because once we felt alone, and we no longer feel alone because we have sister yeshivot that are somewhat like us in different ways. So obviously Otniel, Koa in some senses. They're all in different senses, right? Different things. Siyach, Rav Shagarshu, Petach Tikva, now Ra'anana, Avihu Shelus, Yeshiva. And it's sort of a network. We sort of a network, but everybody's a little bit, each one is a little bit different than the others. I would say that in some ways, Rav Shagar's yeshiva was more radical than ours, in other ways less. But there's a network of yeshivot that are open-minded now. It's much different.
So,
it's much different, and we have an influence on we definitely have an influence on Alon Shvut. There's an influence there. But it's true that we are maverick and very often put aside, but on the other hand, we haven't. Look at Beit Hillel. Beit Hillel, almost everybody involved, all the people who are very influential in Beit Hillel are, not all of them, very many of them either were taught at one of the yeshivot of Kibbutz Dati at Ein Surim, or were rabbis at Kibbutz Dati, and they're really closely connected. The head of Beit Hillel was a Ram at Ein Surim for a few years. The other one was Rosh Yeshiva. The head of the Halachic Beit Midrash was Rosh Yeshiva after me at Ein Surim. I think we have influence, but less more in Israel than in America, that's for sure.
So I want to return to something you said earlier. You mentioned that halakha is rooted in a particular context of a community, and then you also just mentioned that you're less alone now, and there's much more communication, and that can give one courage to be a little bit bolder because you know you have allies, you have sister institutions and communities that see the world in a similar way, but it can also be constricting, or maybe perhaps can also be constricting in that what happens, or how do you navigate the dynamic of your halachic creativity, your halachic boldness that might be very appropriate for a specific community, but through the internet, through the ties that we all have with one another, that psak, it could be known throughout the world and it will be analyzed and scrutinized by rabbis and lay people from very different backgrounds and very different contexts.
The climate is much different here than it is in Israel. I get very little, I get a lot of I need some help with my English.
Okay, what's the word?
אני מקבל ביקורת עניינית, אבל הם מעט מאוד, הם לא פוסלים, הם פסול גברא, הם לא פוסלים אותי, אבל אני מקבל ביקורת עניינית, זה בסדר.
The criticisms you receive are focused on the analysis of the arguments you make. You don't receive criticism against you as a person, as a person.
When the only talk would really come out, probably, I have a lot of things in writing that are going to come out, but it has to do, here, I'll give you two examples. One is I gave the psak about the tshuva about women singing, that women can sing a solo. So, my friend, Rav Eliezer Melamed, was interviewed on the radio. And he said, I don't agree with Rav Bigman, but it's very serious work. That's very nice. Rav Gigi also said he disagrees with me, but in a very nice way. So that's a different climate.
It is a different climate.
Yeah. It's certainly a different. And also, I work a lot on questions of Halakhic infertility. people refer families to me that are from different worlds.
Wow.
Right? All of a sudden I said, so-and-so said we should talk to you. I don't know if I should mention the names, but like people of different worlds. Like some people from the Merkaz Arav kind of world, and other yeshivot. I was recently, some young couple said, this very important rabbi said he didn't know how to help us, but he said we should call you. I was surprised. I know him, we're friendly. He's in a different world altogether from me, but we're friendly. And he realized that I'm a troubleshooter for these issues, so he sent them to me.
Wow.
I hope it will be solved.
Hope so too.
I hope I get the phone call. I usually get a phone call afterwards. I like an invitation to a breed or something like that. Something like that. Could be a breed or something.
So that's
recently, by the way, I was walking just after lunch. I'm walking down the road and I get a phone call from somebody, and I was sure it's a Halakhic question. I get about approximately 3 a week on these questions, and she said, "Our baby girl is now 5 months old. I just remembered that you deserve a thank you." That's all.
It's hard to remember such things when you have a baby.
Right, she was busy, but all of a sudden, so I was very happy that it was another one.
Very nice. So you're writing on this, on Halakhic infertility, that's...
Most of it is already written, but then we were asked to write about questions of family planning. And this is a good example. When we started working on family planning, the ones about Halakhic infertility, they were all my...
We as
my friend Benny Holtzman, who was a teacher at the Yeshiva, and the Rav of Mali Gilboa. And he's a very, very good Talmid Chacham and a good editor. He edits a lot of Halachic works. Somebody put out Halachic work and they said, your work is fine, but the editor is great. Unbelievable. So he's very good. So when we started this, so all the tshuvot about Halakhic infertility were all in my head. So it was just like referencing and things like that. But when we started working on these issues of family planning, we started working, as I do, straight from the beginning, from the crowd, and then we found that much of the work of the post-communal 20th century wasn't really rigorous. It seems not rigorous. It would seem not to be rigorous. It meant that we had to do a lot of work, going through everything from the beginning, from the Sugyot and the Rishonim, and as usual, what happens when you do that?
Something different.
Usually leniencies, that's the thing. It usually you end up with leniencies. And that's why people say, Rabbi Bigman, how are you so lenient? And I say, well, I don't pay so much attention to the developments of the second half of the 20th century. And I appreciate them, and I will look at them, and I don't disregard them. But the funny thing is, when I do that, I feel like this is what my Rashi Yeshiva would be expecting me to do. Yeah. They wouldn't expect me just to follow. So even Moshe Feinstein says at the beginning of his book, this is a suggestion, you should think about it. Yeah, yeah. So I think about it. So that's the thing to say.
Did something go wrong in the middle of the 20th century? What happened to Halakha in the...
I don't know in general. I don't know, maybe in these particular issues. Right, so recently somebody wrote an analysis, gender study of these issues. She's a good friend of mine also, but it could be that it has to do with gender studies, but I can have 2 or 3 different ways of analyzing this. For instance, a general tendency at the end of the 20th century to be machmir, which has nothing to do with gender at all, right? So that's another thing. And also some people say after the Shoah, the poskim were very concerned with family planning. I've heard many explanations over the year. So I'm not saying she's wrong, but it's more complicated than just one point of view. And there's always a Halakhic basis. So I can understand what they did. I don't understand how they don't. If they would work it through from the beginning, from the Sugyot, and mention all the Rishonim and say, we think we should go this way, that would be a different story. But I don't understand how to just and assumptions are made. So I don't understand how the assumptions are made. How do they make this assumption?
Question from the audience? Yeah.
If a woman isn't biologically able to provide an egg. But the husband, so it'd be a donor egg, but the husband still wants to have biological children.
Okay.
Where do you stand on the issue of surrogacy?
What part of it? Do you mean, I'll tell you where the serious halachic problem is has to do with the question of a yichus.
Determining the Jewish status of
the Jewish status
child.
and so on. And
Jewish status was there, or the question of a misadventure?
a misadventure, there's all these questions, and I
can't fix that.
I don't have a special take on that issue. I think the authorities of the 20th century actually handled the question quite well, but they have a very serious argument about whether or not who is the true mother, the bearer of the child or the genetic mother. It's a serious question, and there's no halakhic material. It's like it's a true tshuva in the sense that they have to deal with a new question, and there's no footwork to be done. Not really. They try to find something in the source, but everything they find is only, you have to tell me this, a smachta.
Ex post facto attaching something to an earlier
Right.
source, but that's not really what it's about. So.
Okay, so but practically, I think that Zalman Nehemiah's idea is more practical. He thinks that the mother who bears the child is truly the mother. But either way you go, somebody gets hurt. It's not like the usual case. That's the problem. And I don't have anything to add on their thoughts, to be quite honest, and not just trying to be humble. I think that they actually discussed the question from all sides, and it's very hard to decide who was correct. So that's why I think it's a very far-fetched, by the way, the possibility that this child will marry the brother or the sister, and I think it's very far-fetched. I don't know if we should be so. Rav Zalman Nehemiah is concerned because he said, what if they don't accept my opinion? Because his way is much easier because the mother who bears the child, she's the mother. It's much easier to handle it, but he tells Puah that they should mark the child in some way so they won't marry its biological brother or sister.
It's more a problem with sperm donation, because with sperm donation, you can actually have
Hundreds of
50 or 60 or 100 children in one city who all share the same biological father.
Right, so these are
It's
questions.
much less of a problem with
These are
family.
questions in the present. There'll be bigger questions in the future, and I don't have any specific. And the reason for that is very simple, because my methodology is to get back to basics, and the basics don't help us here. They don't help us. When I have criticism of the poskim, it's because I think they haven't done the research, the necessary research from the Talmud and the early commentators straight through. There's a lack, but there's no lack of research here because there's no research that can actually help us. It's open-ended.
So for these new cases, in medical halakha and other areas, where we're confronting a situation that did not exist at all, there is no precedent. What do we do? What do we do? All right.
I don't know.
Okay.
What would Chazal have done?
What would Chazal have done?
Or what did they do? Maybe
It's
that's
very
a
speculative.
better
It's very
question.
speculative.
Yeah, well, okay. I'm very happy that I'll come, not only will you come out with food for thought, I'll come out for food for thought. Not that I haven't thought about it in the past, but I didn't even make any so much progress in it because my methodology doesn't help us so much with these kind of very, very new questions. But also, new questions are multiplying. Right? New questions are multiplying. And also, new situations are multiplying that do have source material and lead us into a dead end. I'll give you an example of a nightmare I have.
Yeah.
There are more and more single people of older age. There are more and more divorcees. So the cases in which we'll have a Kohen and a Gusha who, I'll put it in a very, very simple kind of American way, they fall in love. I think it's a little bit simplistic, but okay, but these people found each other, right? These questions are going to multiply, only because of the facts. My first teacher of halakha is the Mitziut. The Mitziut is going to be, the reality, there are going to be more and more divorced women who meet Kohanim. How are we going to handle that? In a large scale. That, like those kind of things. Actually, the first meeting of the Beit Midrash Hilchati of Beit Hillel, I said we should work on kindles on Shabbat. They said, you're crazy, more or less. They said, why do you think that? I said, because I think the future is that there will no longer be printed books, and I can't imagine a Shabbat without reading. I said, this is what people do on Shabbat, they read. So I wasn't exactly right, because it turns out that young people prefer printed books, right? But I'm still right about elderly people who need the Kindle to read, which I think are extenuating circumstances. It's easier to solve than just to make it mutar for everybody. Sure. And I think it's something to work on. And it's not that hard to solve it, but it needs to be worked on because there are going to be more and more people. People are living to an older age. And eyesight is something which tends to fail to a great extent. And I think we're going to need the Kindles for these elderly people on Shabbat, so they can read, so they can learn on Shabbat. So, but they thought I was real, like, they thought, and that is something which could be worked on, and maybe I should work on it. I haven't gotten around to it, but.
Interesting. So tell me a little bit about the experience then of confronting, let's say, a Kohen and a Grusha, a Kohen and a divorcee, a couple that Halacha, as it's conventionally understood, prohibits their marriage, or some other person confronting a Halakhic challenge that is really confronting in an existential way and causing or potentially causing like real anguish. How do you balance your compassion for the people in front of you, or maybe sense of responsibility for the state of Israel, or responsibility to the sources, the way you read them in a creative way, and also a sense of humility in Yirat Shamayim? How do you, what's the psychology, the phenomenology as you confront a situation like that?
So you don't want to talk about examples, you want to talk
examples,
about the mindset?
You can give examples too, that's fine, whatever is going to...
Okay, so this is really my mentors, like my later mentors, it's always about trying to solve the problem for the human beings. And I think the main question of the posek is, does he have sympathy with the problem at hand? And when I used to talk to posek, I could tell whether they had sympathy for the problem at hand, whatever the problem was, whether they thought it was along the lines of, so let them marry somebody else. Like they have really care about many issues. But most of the poskim have compassion, and they immediately, their mind starts working on trying to find a solution, but they don't always find a solution. So I feel I'm in the same mode. I try to find a solution that was workable and that I could feel safe with. It was very interesting things that come on. We had a question of, we had a certain question that had to do with the Kohen, a young Kohen, young woman, and Rabakshi Doron came to our area, but I couldn't speak to him. I said, because I had to give a shiur that day, I couldn't leave the kibbutz. So Rav Reiner asked him, what do you say about this? So that this question, Rav Bigman asked you, what do you say about this question? And then Rabakshi Doron said, Rav Mashash, this is not Yosef Mashash, this is Shalom Mashash. Okay. The Rav Rashi of Yerushalayim, who was a big Rav in Morocco first. He said, he has a solution, but I don't feel that I can honestly give his solution to you. But he feels in terms of my integrity, I can't give this, but he feels that that this solution has integrity. Call him. It's an amazing thing. So I had an idea in my head of how to solve the problem.
Can you share? What can you tell more about the story?
Well, I don't know if I should.
Okay,
I can, but I'll try it without details because so nobody will recognize. Two religious kids, she was once, they left the fold for a while, and she went somewhere off in the world and had a white night stand with somebody. And then they found each other. Very nice young people. He was a Kohen. Okay? So, I'm not going to get into all the details now because it's not appropriate. But